In this video, I'm going to talk to you about my experiences with a very interesting and really quite different speaker system, the German Physiks Borderland MK IV that you can see there behind me. And they are an omnidirectional speaker, which is of course completely different to a traditional speaker. And this is not my first rodeo with German Physiks omnidirectional speakers, and maybe it's just, the HiFi system that I have for at the moment being such high quality, or maybe it's my new listening room layout and different acoustic treatment that's getting more out of this design of speaker, possibly. But really I think it's just the Borderlands being, this close to a complete package speaker. They are really exceptionally good, and I would go as far as to say these are probably my favourite speakers so far. If you have followed this channel for a while, you will likely recognise the German Physiks speaker form factor, because I've had the little brothers to the Borderlands here on a number of occasions since I started the channel. And I also know you guys in the US recognise this style of speaker with the Walsh Ohm omnidirectional speakers. And I think there are some similarities in concept, but I know there are some very important distinct differences between the two approaches. And the German Physiks speakers are German designed, German engineered. They're actually hand-built speakers in Germany. And therefore, I think we expect some kind of crazy level German engineering going on here, and some very high performance, given their retail price or asking price, which is just shy of £30,000. So a lot of money. And what do we get for that money? Well, essentially a very clever sub-satellite system, as there is a 12-inch down-firing bass driver that is impossible for me to get on camera, so I didn't even try, but trust me, it's there. Then the cone-looking thing on the top is a carbon fibre speaker driver called a DDD driver that's responsible for everything above 190 Hz. So the DDD driver is producing a lot of the important music information. There are some obvious benefits to all of the sound coming from the same driver, or essentially the same point in space, all of that sound coming from the same material of driver, and there is no crossover needed for that driver. So there's no crossover in the kind of mid-range treble region like we see with most traditional speakers. So there are some real obvious advantages and benefits to essentially a single driver solution, the same as with any single driver solution. But interestingly, I've measured a DDD driver in this room before, and all German Physiks speakers use the same DDD driver. So essentially the measurements would be the same for the Borderland driver, and they perform surprisingly well from a frequency response point of view, in terms of smoothness, in terms of extension, surprisingly well, better than other single driver solutions that I've had in here and measured before. So it's German engineering, should we expect any less? Being an omnidirectional speaker that is octagonal in shape means there is no front and no back. Except there kind of is, as there is a speaker cable terminal plate, of course, that I'm sure everyone would have as the back so that you don't see it. But there is a German Physiks logo plate that creates really a pseudo front to the speaker, but you don't really have to think about that because you don't have to worry about towing. Towing doesn't exist with this type of speaker, but of course you do have to think about their placement in the room, the same as with any other speaker that you would set up. And I think it's made a little bit easier. The setup process is easier because we don't have to think about towing, but you will need a strong back because they're heavy speakers at 56 kilograms. But their placement in the room is something that I think I've got wrong in the past. In the past, I was thinking because they're an omnidirectional speaker, I have to try and account for that in their setup or placement in the room. This time I didn't do that. I just put them down where I would put any other traditional designed speaker, where I have those masking taped blue T's on the floor in this listening room. The reason I have those T's is because it's a marker to me that I know that is the best spot in this room to give me the best bass response where I sit and listen. And I can put a speaker closer to the intersection of the T if I want a little bit less room and a little bit more just speaker bass, or I can position the speaker further back along the line of the T if I want to introduce a little bit more room and introduce a little bit more bass from room gain. Really simple setup that I use there. But interestingly, the Borderlands were perfect for their bass, very, very close to the T intersection, which makes them about perfect speakers bass-wise for my taste and this room. Hint, hint, big hint, hint, German Physiks. And let's talk about bass, because essentially here we have two 12-inch subwoofers in sealed octagonal cabinets, and you don't see that every day. But it means each panel of the speaker is smaller in size and will therefore resonate much less than a larger panel that you typically see on the sides of speakers. Well, that is the theory. There is bracing inside, of course, and also a Helmholtz resonator, which is an acoustic pressure damping solution that can be tuned to specific frequencies, so that deals with some of the internal pressure. And then German Physiks use another technology called HiFi, which is another method of reducing resonances within the cabinet. So like I said, there is some pretty crazy extreme German engineering going on here. And we can of course start to see why these are very expensive speakers. Speakers live and die for me in their bass delivery. It's the thing I care about the most and noticed first, because if the bass is not right, I could never live with that speaker, or at least on its own without subwoofers. And I would say the bass from the Borderlands is about perfect for me, because there's a lot of it, and it's big, full, substantial, warming bass that's very pleasing to listen to. And it hits the room and it lights up the room with that warm pressure feeling, which I really like. And it's a nice, bouncy, boppy. Again, I think I used the word chewy. I'm going to use it again, like a chewy bass that you feel it on your body. It's a lovely pressure feeling. It's not mechanical. It's not dry. It just has a lovely vibe about it, bouncy and boppy. And that really works for a lot of the music that I've been listening to lately. And then more important or impressive to me is the mid-bass region, which is where the fullness and the warmth of music, I think, really comes from. I find it so important because when that's there, the vocals can just sit on top of it really lovely. And the balance of what the Borderlands deliver in that regards, the bass regards and vocals, I think was absolutely fantastic. But even better was the fact that the bass was full, it was warm, it was chewy, but it wasn't fat or bloated at all. So that means that it just dissipates, that warmth dissipates fantastically well and quick. And that allows for a very open and see-through onto the music type of soundstage. So there's no congestion of the middle part of the sound, even though we've got a lot of fullness and warmth there. That balance that the Borderlands strike up, I think, is absolutely perfect. And yeah, that's the bit that gets me first, right? The bass gets you first. And now I do have a killer hi-fi system here at the moment, which is undoubtedly helping with the bass and the overall sound. The DAC from Ideon Audio, I know is going to be a big bass, really dynamic sounding DAC. And there is a lot of power here from the new Griffin Diablo 333 integrated amplifier. And both of these are of course important, but the speaker still needs to be able to deliver it. And you can probably tell from my excitement about this part of the Borderlands, I love the bass from them, really have enjoyed the bass from them. And I want to throw in an example because a couple of weeks ago I was out in Portugal listening to a crazy money, big system with avant-garde horns. And one of the tracks that was played was a Sheffield Labs drum track, and we all know how fantastically well recorded they are with a lot of dynamic range. It's very quiet, you have to crank the volume. And interestingly, I've listened to that track a lot since I've come back from Portugal. But the Borderlands with the Griffin and the system here was getting me very close, very similar in terms of presentation, factoring in this is a much smaller room than what was out in Portugal. It's getting me close. What I loved about the track from this system and the speakers was the dynamics, how fast the bass could be, really attacking and really dynamic. Fantastically well presented across the soundstage from left to right. That bit is all good and really lively and dynamic, great. But the bit that impressed me the most was the details of the drums, the texture that you could hear, the extra bits of information combined with the really fast attacking, really full on, obviously I was cranking the volume, but really full on attacking sound. The balance, the mixture of everything. It's all those extra bits that separates really good hi-fi, really good, the way it does everything, dynamics and detail. You don't lose one in favor of the other. That's what really high-end hi-fi can give you. The mid-range and treble, it's hard to not talk about it as one because really it's all coming from the same single driver. I think is likely to be the maker or the deal breaker here for someone spending this much money on a speaker, because it's different to a traditional speaker like from the Martin Parker Trio Diamond that I had here before, that's also about a £30,000-ish speaker, and obviously they provided a great comparison. Because the Martin have a really, what I'm going to call like a squidgy clean, really clear, precise, and really quite crisp way of opening up the sound window and allowing you to hear all of the information within the music very crisply, very well organized, very clearly. That's fantastic. The German Physiks open that window up just as wide, but they present the same information just a little bit softer, just a little bit more kind of edges rounded off, just a little bit more diffuse. So not quite as squidgy clean, crisp, a little bit softer and more diffuse. And that sounds like a small difference, but of course it's not because of the way you hear everything. Now, interestingly, the slightly more softer, slightly more diffuse sound is probably a little bit more relaxing. It's probably a little bit more analog-like. And I actually think it's a little bit more forgiving. It's a little bit more forgiving of the music quality, which is great for me. Some of the stuff I listen to is a little bit roughly recorded. But it's also probably a little bit more forgiving to the hi-fi system quality as well. Although you're still going to need a really good hi-fi system to get the best out of £30,000 speakers, of course. But I think there'll be just that little bit more forgiving. But which is better from the two different types of presentation, I actually couldn't tell you because they're both exceptionally good in their own right. I think the pro of the Borderlands is that softer sound, slightly softer, not a lot softer, slightly softer sound. Is of course a bit more forgiving, but if you like that sound that's got a bit more edge, a bit more lively and a bit more upfront, a bit more cutting, well then that's not necessarily what the Borderlands are going to do as well as something like the Martin Parker Trio Diamond. It's like a small difference but a big distinguishing difference. But interestingly, you can make the Borderlands sound more like that, because on the speaker cable terminal plate there is an adjustment, so you can adjust between -2 decibels for the treble and +4 for the treble. And interestingly, these were brand new speakers when they came to me, so of course all brand new speakers sound a bit laboured and subdued at first, so I put them pretty quickly on the +2 dB. I just preferred a little bit more zip, a little bit more kind of liveliness in this acoustically treated listening room. So having that adjustment ability I actually found to be, through the course of this review, massive for me, because I listened through all the different options. I liked different things about all of them, but +2 dB ended up being about the right sound or the right balance for the system. So having that control, that adjustability, literally was the difference between me liking the speakers and really liking the speakers, because sound balance is so critically important. Because it means we can set things up so that we don't get fatigue, or worse, get bored. And I think if you're in a very lively room, or maybe if you're just struggling for bass a little bit, the -2 option will likely be your best friend, because it will balance your system completely the other way, because treble down also means bass up in terms of perception. Being more specific about the treble, there is a lot of detail there. You never feel shortchanged with the music information from a treble point of view, but it's always presented just that little bit softer and more rounded off, which I actually don't mind. But some might find a lack of treble crispiness to mean that the speaker is a little bit softer sounding, and maybe it lacks a little bit of aggression or attack from a treble point of view. They don't really kind of cut through like they can with some other speakers. That's an important thing to think about. But the reason why I like the +2 dB option is because it gave the Borderlands just a bit more high frequency excitement, or just height, presence and scale in my particular listening room. And on the +4 dB setting, that was obviously extended more, and that meant the way the sound from the speakers got out into the room from a high frequency point of view was even more impressive. +2 dB was good, but +4 was really, really impressive in that regard. So I liked that, really liked that, and the way that helped with carving out the sound a little bit clearer. I liked it. But on +4 dB, the vocals were just a little bit too sibilant when the vocals were sibilant in the music. It's just a bit too present for me. I'm very sensitive to it. So that's why +2 dB, was the perfect compromise of excitement, energy, a little bit more cutting from the treble, more height and scale, more presence in the room. And yeah, again, fantastic to be able to choose and pick the one that works best. And I mentioned the vocals, they were fantastic. Detailed, clear, emotive, with fantastic tone, timbre and timing. Fantastic. And interestingly, the vocals sounded more Paper Driver-like to me. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because a lot of people will be able to reference against that. More Paper-like than maybe Metal Driver-like. But really, it's a sound of like a carbon fibre driver, which I actually always like because it's like a nice compromise between a paper sound, which is a bit more soft and sultry, but with a little bit more specificity to it. That's exactly how I would describe the vocals here. Lovely. Fantastic. Great tone, great timing, great detail. A little bit softer like we get from paper, but not too soft to the point where they go squishy. Just a nice, rounded, again, people would call it an analog-like character. Really, really like the vocals. I've enjoyed that part of these speakers a lot. And I think that is because the transition between the DDD driver to the bass driver is absolutely flawless and seamless. And you never ever once feel like you're listening to a speaker. You always just feel like you're listening to music, event or samples or sound or just whatever instruments happening in your listening room, behind the speakers, out in front of you, to the sides, less so in here because I'm limited on width, but like it's just music happening around you. Never once do you think like you're listening to speakers, and that I think that's the whole point of this type of design. It's to be extremely transparent and to put the sound into the room in a different way. And it is different, you know, to a traditional speaker. Traditional speakers can do it fantastically well, but like the Omni 360 speaker, it's just a little bit different. It just does spatial information just that bit better. And that would be, there's so many strengths of this speaker, but of course that's going to be the one that probably stands out, the bit that grabs the audiophile the most in terms of making a decision whether they will go for a speaker like this. It's the sound staging capability that's just that bit better. And by placing the Borderlands in the exact same spot as I would any other speaker, of course I was directly comparing them. And when music or when hi-fi systems place sounds behind the speakers, I call it beyond the speakers, that's always impressive. And traditional speakers can do that phenomenally well. But the Borderlands just seem to do that, that invisibility trick or that place the sound behind the speakers trick just that little bit better, or maybe just that little bit more convincing than other traditional style speakers that I've had in here before. So that was a real strength. But the bit that I liked more than that was the sound that kind of becomes more out into the room, or creates a greater sense of three-dimensionality, because it creates sound from you at the listening position, which is about 12 feet away from me, to beyond the speakers. So that makes a huge kind of sonic landscape, spatial information, spatial landscape that we sit and listen in. And there's a great track for testing that. It's Sarah Bareilles, I think it is. It's a live recording, sitting at the dock of the bay, whatever that famous track is. Sorry, my mind has gone blank on it, but I'll put the details down below in the video description. It's fantastic because you have a live singer, and you have the crowd, and the ambience and the way that crowd is put together in that recording is phenomenal. It's a great test track. And the Borderlands, the way they brought that out into the room with fantastic layering clarity, but with a slightly softer edge, made it sound just that little bit sweeter and more organic and analog and lovely to me. But then I stuck on some Metallica, the newly remastered Black album. We all know that's a very tense, densely layered album, but the Borderlands were able to unpack that information so well, almost headphone-like in terms of unpacking the densely layeredness of that Black album. So like that was, shifting from very audiophile music to something not like the Metallica, but still being able to really enjoy it because it's full, it's warm, it's perfectly timed, balanced, everything's nicely balanced. There's no aggression, maybe not enough aggression for some people, but like from a listening fatigue point of view, tense music still has that lovely, softer, more analog-like character. So really, really, I've enjoyed that a lot. And one of the things that German Physiks say about these speakers is that they have perfect phase linearity, which I assume is part of the Omni design. And I assume that is one of the crucial factors for being able to unpack all this music, create this fantastic spatial soundstage, to be able to do all of these things with such clarity and such detail. And I've always known that that is the theory of an omnidirectional speaker, or the German Physiks speakers that I've had in here before. But this is the first time I would say that this style of speaker has actually made real audible sense to me in my room, and actually made me believe in it as a speaker design approach. So you can probably tell that I really like the Borderlands and that they've been working phenomenally well in this listening room. But what about any negatives? Well, I thought their very low sensitivity of about 86.1, typical German, 86.1 decibels is very low. So that I thought that would mean I would have to say to you, you're going to need really powerful amplifiers with these speakers, and you probably do. But German Physiks say that their crossover design means that they work really well with high current speakers. You don't necessarily need 10,000 watts, but a high current design, which means they can work really well with tube amplifiers. I think I would have loved to have listened to them. If I had a bit more review time, I would have got out the really heavy Griffin Essence pre-power that's still here and listened to it pure Class A through these speakers. I would have liked that extra bit of control. What does that extra control and energy and excitement from that pre-power give me from them? But I've got to say, the Diablo 333 integrated, what an integrated amplifier, because it's got Griffin power and ballsiness, but with more refinement and musicality than I've heard from a Griffin integrated at this kind of price level. So yeah, I can easily recommend this pairing as well. So time to sum up this very long review. The Borderlands are very different speakers to look at, but I think they look really cool, and I like the fact that they take up less floor space than some of the other larger speakers that I've had in here, and yet they still sound like a really big speaker. And it's the bass that's definitely got me. It's got me because I can listen to some electronic music or some, big vibing reggae. And, the pressure, the bass just makes that music come alive for me. But then the next day, I can listen to some folk or some classical or some jazz or some big female vocalists or some rock. And the Borderlands deliver all of the things you want from all of those music, like delicacy or dynamics or soundstage spatiality. It really is a complete package speaker, with the exception of maybe like a more attacking crispy treble, but that's like a personal preference thing. And I think you could always add like a super tweeter on top and have a little play with that. That could be fun to do. So I can see why the Borderland was German Physiks' first speaker back in '92. I can see why, as a speaker, it's put them on the map, because I wish they were staying here longer. Sadly, this has only been quite a short review for me, because these need to go on to the HiFi Lounge, which is a hi-fi retailer here in the UK, for an event happening at the end of April, which, if you'd like to hear these speakers, go to the event, hear them for yourself. It's a shame, because I would love to keep these here for longer, because these have worked so well for me. I've really enjoyed them. I feel like I'm only just beginning to, get to know them and, experience what they're really capable of. But they've hit me enough, they've delivered enough for all the things that I like in music for me to say they're probably my favourite speaker so far. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. Hope you found it useful and helpful. If you've enjoyed it, hit the thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, of course, subscribe to the channel.